Let's get it. Week one. After the longest feeling off season of my short young boyhood life, we are finally hours. I mean, we are closing in exactly 24 hours away from the first game. Brady, my man, what is up? How excited are you for this? Did this take you by surprise? I felt like I was in football is never going to get here mode for so long that I'm so shocked it is finally here. Did it take you by surprise like it took me by surprise?
Oh yeah, for sure, man. I mean, I'm so excited for this season. We have so much stuff going on, lots of news that's coming in and week out, and I feel like it's going to be kind of a crazy season with everything going on in the world. And I don't know, I'm just really looking forward to football being back.
Yeah, it is super exciting. We are here at Football Diehards breaking down the DFS slate for week one. And I know at points last year there was like times in the slate where it was these ugly, 10 game slates with bye weeks. And I was like, well, Bears and Washington are both involved in their own games. I don't want to play those. I'm like, maybe it's just that week one vibes. I'm excited about nearly every NFL team in some facet. They all have something to offer us week one. Hope springs eternal when it's week one for the Cincinnati Bengals, for the Cleveland Browns. So for me, I think this is going to be one of the better slates, both in terms of like raw NFL excitement. And week one, as always, you get a ton of new players. You get a ton of casual action. I think it's the best week to play DFS. And there's probably more of an information edge this week heading into maybe the strangest or heading out of maybe the strangest offseason I have ever seen. So let's hop into it. We're going to go game by game, talk about what you need to know for cash, for GPP, and tournament, and break it all down. First game we have is the Miami Dolphins versus New England. New England are 6.5-point favorites, a pretty low 43 total. How are you looking at this game with this brand new look New England Patriots led by Cam Newton?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how it all plays out. I mean, no Tom Brady is going to be really interesting. And Cam Newton, I'm really excited to see what he's like in New England. I mean, Cam Newton is someone who I'm pretty high on. I know he hasn't been the best lately, but I think he'll fit in decently in this offense.
Yeah, for me, I'm so surprised that people thought Cam Newton wouldn't fit in this offense. We saw it in 2018. He dropped his ADOT to I believe his lowest in his career, and he averaged an above average completion percentage over expectation, meaning based on the depth of target of his throws, he was completing more passes than you would expect based on league average numbers. That was largely because of a shoulder injury that basically forced him to give up his deep ball. But even despite the fact that he physically couldn't throw the deep ball, he threw his short ball, which is something we didn't know was in his repertoire, particularly well, above average completion percentage over expectation. We saw him change up his game and do it seamlessly. That's the type of game that we've seen Tom Brady run for years. I think the transition is going to be much smoother than people anticipate. The 6.5 line doesn't surprise me, and the target share is so concentrated in New England. When Cam Newton throws the ball, he's looking at probably two guys. They have two rookie tight ends, both not listed as a starter. Ryan Izzo is the starter. So for me, you can easily go to James White. You can easily go to Julian Edelman. My only concern is that their defense is so stifling that there's not really a ton of run back options. I don't want to get Devontae Parker going against Stephon Gilmore. I don't know what we're getting out of Preston Williams in week one. He said he's getting there, but he's still not 100%. And Mike Gesicki also a little nicked up, popping up on the injury report. So for me, I don't think this is a game that's just going to feature enough points to stack, and there's not enough certainty really. There's no crazy bell cow backs for me that I have to get any cash game lineups from these teams, any tournament interest. Is there any way that you're getting these guys into your lineups on such a wide slate with all no teams on bye yet? What are you doing, or are you just moving on from this game?
I mean, not a game I want to target in general, but I do like Cam Newton quite a bit. I like him in cash. I mean, 6,100. It allows you to go up and pay for your running backs, your wide receivers, and he has that rushing yard upside as well for a nice floor. I think he's probably going to be the goal line back at those goal line touches as well. So in this Patriots offense, like you mentioned, he throws the short ball well, and that's what they do well in New England. So I actually do like Cam Newton quite a bit. I like him in cash. I like him in tournaments, and I guess that's pretty much it. If you want, you can stack him with Edelman. You can stack him with White. I think White's a little bit too expensive for me at 6,000, but probably just going to play Cam Newton by himself in cash and then work my way around him in other parts of my lineup. If you want to talk defense, I think the Patriots defense at 3,200 is not a bad option against Miami, but pretty much it's just Cam Newton for me, or pretty much just staying away from this game.
Let's head on over to a team we are both intimately familiar with, the Cleveland Browns facing the Baltimore Ravens. 7.5 point favorites the Baltimore Ravens are, and a very sneaky upside 48-point total. For me, this is one of the possible pivots to a handful of really chalky games we'll be talking about later. And if you're looking for ownership, we will have that at Football Diehards this year. So be tuned. We'll have that in the next few days. Get it out for week one so you can really get that tournament edge. So be tuned. Stay tuned for that at Football Diehards. I think a guy who is going to show up once we get those ownership levels, he's going to show up well under owned, at least compared to what we know his upside is Nick Chubb. He's a guy who, I mean, this was the exact scenario last year. They're heading into Baltimore. Baltimore is clearly the better team on paper, and Nick Chubb just doesn't care. Nick Chubb's talent at some point just shines through, and he destroys this team. I think he put up like over 40 DK points, absolutely buried them. And that was like one of their only losses of the year, was that loss to the Browns. Now you add Jedrick Wills, you add Conklin, you replace both tackles on a team that already has talent so much elsewhere at wide receiver, at tight end, at quarterback. I think they have one of the most promising young quarterbacks in the league, despite last year, like his offensive line was bad, his staff around him, like the offensive play calling, the head coach was all terrible. Now they get Stefanski in, who by all accounts players seem to love and just rally around. So for me, I think this is a team that, not a betting show. I think they could cover this spread of 7.5, keep it close enough to get me some Nick Chubb in my lineups. And we saw last year, Baltimore in that Tennessee game, Lamar Jackson does the unheralded 300, 100, 300 passing, 100 rushing. That is the double bonus on DK. Any interest in stacking the Ravens? I know Lamar is probably going to be chalky and maybe Marquise Brown. Could you move a little deeper to a Miles Boykin? Are you going with a guy like Mark Andrews? How do you attack this game as a whole?
Well, I'm kind of going the other way. I mean, I'm a Browns fan, so I'm going to try to leave a bias out of it. I actually think the Ravens are probably going to get out to a good lead here, and I do like Lamar Jackson. I like Mark Andrews. I think that's a pretty good stack, although it's going to be really popular. In cash, I'm not necessarily going Lamar Jackson, but if you want to play Lamar Jackson in cash, that's always a fantastic play because you do have that rushing yard upside. But Marquise Brown's another good option to stack with Lamar Jackson as well. And as for the Cleveland side, because I do think that they possibly get behind early, I like Mayfield at 5,700. Like you said, there's so much talent in Cleveland. I mean, they should be good. I mean, they have so many weapons. I like Odell Beckham Jr. at 5,900 as well. I think that's a fantastic price for him. Might be the cheapest we see him all year as well. I guess another option I'm looking at is Kareem Hunt. If they do get out to a down behind early, Kareem Hunt can catch some passes. Very, very, very talented running back. 5,100 is another option I'm looking at. But you're right. This is a game I really do want to target. 48.5 point total. I think it can go a little bit under owned here. So this is a game I'm going to have a lot of ownership.
Yeah, I would anticipate that, like you said, the guys on the Baltimore side get all of the buzz, while Cleveland is utterly left behind, despite the fact that you and I both seem to be particularly high on at least their potential. So for me, if you're running Baltimore guys, you essentially have to run it back with some Cleveland guys. If you're like me and you think Cleveland keeps it close, maybe you roll with Nick Chubb. If you think that Baltimore takes an early lead and just keeps their foot on the pedal, then that's where you get a guy like Odell Beckham, who, like you said, and I agree with this could just be the cheapest we see him. We know how incredibly talented he was when he was with the Giants, and it just didn't pan out last year for both injuries and just complete lack of any offensive continuity, complete lack of just overall organizational continuity. They seemed like a team that was floundering from the top down. So I think they turned that around this year, and this is a game that you want to be looking at. How do I attack the Browns? And obviously, how do I get guys like Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews in my lineup if you can afford them? Moving on to maybe the only game in the slate that I don't really care too much about, Buffalo Bills versus the Jets. I think if Josh Allen and the Bills were facing a team that could really contend with them as an offense, I would be in on maybe, let's say they played Atlanta. If they were playing Atlanta for some reason, I would love to get me like Josh Allen, who just has to throw and drop back. And when Josh Allen drops back, he converts those into rushes often, and he goes deep often. So for me, that would be the scenario where I want them. I don't want them against a Jets team that I think at least offensively, I don't know, they seem like a team that just rolls over. I can't find much to like about this game in terms of stacking potential. I do think Chris Herndon, I think he's like at 30, 31 or 32, maybe 3,300 on DraftKings, basically could end up as his team's number 2 receiver behind Jamison Crowder. Denzel Mims didn't get much of a training camp. Rashad Perriman nicked up as well. Both appeared to be entering week 1 at well under 100% health. So Chris Herndon, a guy who broke out essentially as a rookie tight end, which is almost unheard of, and those guys who do it tend to continue to do it. loses last year due to a myriad of like injury, suspensions, and ugly year for Herndon, unfortunately. So I think he's a guy that I think you get a lot of volume for what you're paying for. I just don't think there's a ton of overall upside in this game. How do you feel about this? Bills 6.5 point favorites, 39.5 point total that came down a half point since the line opened. It's just meh.
I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I see a lot of love out there for the Buffalo offense in DFS, and I don't really understand it. I mean, 39.5 game total, which is the lowest on the slate. If anything, I mean, Josh Allen's a great play. I mean, he has rushing yard upside. I'm just not interested in this game as a whole this week against that Jets defense. Just not a game I want to target. Le'Veon Bell, 5,600, really cheap. I guess maybe that's a decent play, but other than that, this is probably going to be the game I have least exposure to. Not interested all around. Just don't see it being all that high scoring, and I do want to, target the games that are going to be high scoring, the shootouts, and this just probably isn't one of them.
Yeah, I just can't see it. There's a lot of games on the slate where I can tell myself a story about how it shoots out with both these teams. I can't see both of them getting up tons of numbers on offense. Let's move on to, I would say, one of almost certainly the two chalkiest games of the slate, Seattle versus Atlanta. This one is in Atlanta, but they are 1 point dogs, a 49 point total. One of, if not maybe the highest on the slate. You've got so many good options here. You've got this, they're pretty cheap. You get like, I think it's in the range of like between 6 and 7K. You get all of Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett. You can stack them with Russell Wilson fairly easily. The run backs are great from Hayden Hurst if you're buying into that massive void left by Austin Hooper. You got Julio Jones, maybe the most explosive player in the NFL when he is playing at his peak, produces 150-yard games at a higher rate than any other active NFL player. He's also, I believe, done it more than basically any other active NFL player. So I think there are so many options. I will say, before I throw it to you on how you want to attack the passing game, if I'm pivoting off of this game, which you can't eat all of the chalk on a slate, both in terms of there's going to be a handful of a lot of popular plays. I don't have enough lineups, so I'm not building 100. I'm not building 150, so I'm not getting access to all of them. Also, I wouldn't want to anyways. There's just only so many ways you can win a tournament. Playing every popular play is not one of them. I think one way to potentially pivot off of this game, at least in the popular fashion, would be to go Chris Carson. Seattle's a team that under Brian Schottenheimer and Pete Carroll loves to pound the rock when they get the lead. We saw last year, it was I think when they were beating up on Arizona, Russell Wilson attempted like 20 or 25 passes, and it was the most boring game if you were on the Seahawks offense possible. But Chris Carson, that's where he gets his, is a guy who is a very efficient between the tackles rusher, has some receiving upside, but I don't think that's what you're playing him for. If he falls into the end zone early once or twice, they could just continue to lean on him out of the backfield. So for me, maybe that's a way to get contrarian with this. Or is there any interest in that galaxy brain type of play, or is this one where you're just going all in on these offenses?
No, you made a fantastic point there, and I am high on Chris Carson. I do think he's going to go pretty under-owned. Everybody's going to play the Julios. Everybody's going to play the Metcalfs, the Locketts, and nobody's probably going to play Chris Carson. So he does have that upside, 6,200. If he does get into the end zone twice, I mean, that could be a potential, tournament winner there. So, but other than that, I am going to eat some chalk on this game here. I love Matt Ryan. I like the Matt Ryan Hurst stack. You can also stack him with Ridley at 6,100. It's a great price. And of course, how can we not mention Julio Jones at 7,700? I think is a good play as well. If you do want to, I mean, Wilson, Metcalf, Wilson, Lockett are good stacks as well. This is just a game I'm going to have a lot of exposure to. I mean, tied with the highest total on the slate. It's a game I'm going to have a lot of. My favorite play out of this whole thing is from a value standpoint is probably Hurst there at 4,300 at tight end. It allows you to go up and get your McCaffreys, get your Devontae Adams, get your Alvin Kamara's. So I do like paying down at tight end, and Hurst at 4,300. I think that's a fantastic price. Going right into that Austin Hooper role, hopefully getting a lot of targets, receptions, and hopefully falling into the end zone this week.
Yeah, because I think because Calvin Ridley seems to be, like, all three of the non-Julio Jones receivers seem to be at least underpriced in the context of this game and how much we want to stack. I wouldn't be surprised if Julio Jones ends up being a solid. I still think he'll be popular, but I would project him to be. I have him projected as less popular than Calvin Ridley. So maybe that's your pivot. Is this just like Julio Jones does GOAT Julio Jones things and outshines all of the options on this team. One guy who I feel like I've talked to a lot about DFS this week, getting into a handful of different shows. I haven't talked about Todd Gurley. Maybe that's because no one knows what to do with him. His backups are so uninspiring, from Brian Hill, who drops like 2 duds in his starts, and Quadre Olison or Kenyon Barner. They still have these guys. I honestly don't even know, because it doesn't matter to me. I hate to say it because he seems so washed and he lost his receiving role last year, but Todd Gurley seems like the guy. Before we move on to the next game, what do I do with Todd Gurley? That's maybe one of the keys to me to this game that I don't have the answer to.
Again, like Chris Carson, I mean, Gurley's going to most likely be lower owned. And I don't know, he has the upside. I don't know if I'm going to go there personally, but I definitely do see it. 6,100 against the Seattle defense that's not all that great against the run. I think it's worth some shots if you do want to pivot off the massive chalk. Maybe Gurley is able to find the end zone a couple times. I don't know. I'm really excited to see how he fits in at Atlanta. I do want to see how it plays out week one first before I put some ownership on him. But like you said, I don't hate that play. I think it's a nice pivot.
One more thing before we move on, I do think maybe another way to double down on the Chris Carson move would be to go Seattle defense. Because I mean, I think in the ideal scenario for that type of leverage play is we get like 2 Chris Carson touchdowns and a pick six. And then at that point, I know Seattle is never going to let Russell Wilson throw the ball. If they're up 2 possessions, Russell Wilson might as well just be like a statue that hands the ball off to other players because of the way, Brian Schottenheimer wants to not use him. So I think that's maybe how it'd be done. And if they take an early lead, we already saw last year that Matt Ryan, the Falcons were, I think, at 42.8 pass attempts per game. No other team even crested 40. They passed so much more than any other team. And despite the fact that passing is, the more efficient way for an NFL offense to operate, it's also one of the ways that you get high variance outcomes in your defense. Is really for a defense to be like your millie maker winner. You need them to have a touchdown. You need them to basically have that one big difference maker that a defense can accomplish. They get a pick six, they get a sack fumble six, and that happens by an increased amount of dropbacks because touchdowns are essentially random. There's no way to predict them as a defense. You just want more pulls to the slot machine, and despite the fact that that might be scary, that means you want Matt Ryan dropping back 45 times, and you want him throwing at Quentin Dunbar. You want him throwing at Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams scored twice last year. So for me, maybe I do feel good about that being at least a probably lower, very low owned, high upside play in tournaments, although nowhere near cash because we see that, the 49 game total, even the Falcons as underdogs at 23.5 implied team total are both quite impressive. So nowhere near a cash consideration for me, but I do like it as a very contrarian tournament play. Let's move on to a game that I don't plan on spending much time on. Matthew Stafford, the Lions are facing Chicago. Minus 3-point favorite Stafford and the Lions are a 44.5 point total. I like the Lions. The Lions were incredible for 8 games, at least as an offense. We saw Stafford on pace to come up just shy of 40 touchdowns and 5,000 yards. He was like a borderline MVP for 8 games based on the raw stats he was putting up, and then gets injured and doesn't come back for the rest of the year. And the Lions offense crumbles under more quarterback injuries and just overall not, if you don't have at least above average quarterback in the NFL, you're not really going to have success putting up numbers. Now they get Stafford back, should be entirely healthy after a full offseason. So that's the side I have interest in. I think Kenny Golladay, the deep ADOT, the deep passing attempts to Kenny Golladay is really where he makes his money, and that's great for fantasy. Marvin Jones was a guy who's also putting up wide receiver 2 numbers when Stafford's in the lineup. I mean, hell, even Danny Amendola had 3 100-yard games last year, and I think 2 of those came when they had their full outfit of weapons. Lots to like on this side. I basically think as long as DeAndre Swift doesn't end up being healthy, he could even be active, but we know he's not going to be healthy until their running back room gets to 100%, and that means DeAndre Swift is able to take the brunt of the load between the tackles. They're not going to be leaning on that running game much, if at all. So for me, the Lions side, it is wheels up. It's sort of like the Josh Allen situation, though. If I don't think the opposing offense is going to be able to at least contend, I don't care too much. I want these back and forth shootouts, even if it doesn't end up being, a game that hits 70 points, just 2 teams that are contending. They can't take their foot off the gas. That's what I want to look for, especially on DraftKings when you just have these long drives. That's a lot of PPR points building up. I don't see Mitch Trubisky putting up many PPR points. Allen Robinson, sure, a guy who gets as many targets as he does. Yeah, he's in play, and maybe that's how you attack this game. You go Lions passing game. You go your Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay, and Stafford. You run it back with Robinson. Maybe you run back with Tariq Cohen. We don't know what David Montgomery's status is, but I just hesitate so much to anchor any of my few coveted roster spots in my DraftKings lineups to a team helmed by Mitchell Trubisky. Am I crazy for just getting off the Bears entirely? Because I think, Allen Robinson, incredible player. Tariq Cohen, he was in a Millie Maker winning lineup, I think, 2 years ago. He's got big playmaking upside. What are you doing with the fact that the Lions are so good and the Bears suck, basically?
Yeah, I'm actually going to be a little bit different here. I actually do, believe it or not, as awful as this sounds, I like Mitchell Trubisky this week. 5,400, extremely cheap. I do also like the stack with Robinson as well against this Lions secondary, who's not all that great. I don't know. I mean, they said that Trubisky's been looking good in camp. I'm not high on the guy myself, but at 5,400, I think it's a fantastic price. I do think there's some upside in a game that's 44.5 point total without Montgomery. I think they're going to be forced to pass a little bit more. So I think the opportunities are going to be there. And, that Robinson stack looks really nice. He's going to get possibly 10 plus targets around that area. So that's something I'm looking at. From a low owned perspective, nobody's going to play Trubisky. He's not that great, but I don't know. In this matchup, I like it quite a bit, honestly. And as for the running backs, Cohen at 4,900 is not an awful option due to that pass catching ability. And on the Lions side, like you said, I'm really high on Stafford myself. I don't know if this is the matchup where I'm going to target him. Of course, I like Galladay as well, but I'm more so on the Trubisky side, just to be a little bit different, and just because I do see that potential upside.
Yeah, I will say, I believe it was 2 years ago, Mitchell Trubisky, especially with those legs, found himself in the winning lineup of a Millie Maker winner twice, I believe. Not sure if that happens this week, though. Let's move on to one of, I would imagine this game crawls up in ownership, probably based on solely the fact that Christian McCaffrey exists and is the best fantasy running back since probably LaDainian Tomlinson. This is the Carolina Panthers, 3-point underdogs. I'm so surprised. I think they're at home, too. 3-point underdogs to the Raiders, a 47.5 point total. That's come up a half point since the lines opened. So for me, this game obviously starts with Christian McCaffrey. There's more than enough value on this slate to get Christian McCaffrey in your lineups at 10K on both DraftKings and Fanduel. How are you, like, you have $60,000 on Fanduel? How are you not playing Christian McCaffrey? Price harder, Fanduel. Come on. So for, looking back at DraftKings, for me, this is at least you have to get Christian McCaffrey. In tournaments, though, I know in the second half of last year, basically once he got over 10,000, he appeared in like a majority of top 0.1% lineups in just one of his final like 8 games, I believe the number is. You didn't have to have Christian McCaffrey. He wasn't like prohibitive to being in a Millie Maker winning lineup, but essentially the opportunity cost of paying 10K, especially in tournaments and especially at the ownership you had to pay up at too, didn't make him an absolute necessity almost on any week. It was like one week that a majority of the top 100 or whatever lineups had him. So I don't think in tournaments you have to go to McCaffrey. And I think the biggest problem with playing McCaffrey in tournaments is he costs so much that he also pigeonholes you into playing other like very specific other plays. This week, that's going to be Antonio Gibson. I think if you play McCaffrey, outside of, I don't know, maybe you could like play James Robinson. Now, we'll talk about the Jags backfield later. Or if David Montgomery goes down, you could get Tariq Cohen. But I think, especially if David Montgomery ends up not suiting up, Tariq Cohen ends up being chalky anyways. So you basically, by going with Christian McCaffrey chalk, you also commit yourself to Antonio Gibson chalk. And maybe you're okay with that. I guess that's where I'll pitch this game to you. If you are approaching this game with McCaffrey, especially in tournaments, how do you avoid having a lineup that is immediately duped once you enter 1 o'clock on Sunday?
I mean, for me, this is more of a cash game play. I'll tell you right now, I'm locking McCaffrey in for cash. I did it pretty much every week last year, and it worked out. I mean, he has an extremely good floor, an extremely good ceiling. I think you could go in there in tournaments, but there's just so many other options at running back. So I don't necessarily think you have to, but in cash, I'm certainly going to McCaffrey. But that will cause you to go down and get some of that chalk, which is fine for cash. But in tournaments, I do think you can go elsewhere. Some other running backs I want to talk about. Josh Jacobs, 6,800, I think can go a little bit underlooked here. There's a big game total on this. I think it's like 47.5. I think it is going to be pretty high scoring. And I don't know, Josh Jacobs, I'm really, really high on the guy. He has 100 plus running 100-yard plus running upside there. And then another value play I like at the tight end position, and I believe he's playing, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ian Thomas at 3,400. I definitely think he can get some targets there. But overall, this game is pretty much, McCaffrey or really maybe some Thomas at running back. I mean, tight end if you do want to pay down, but it's pretty much McCaffrey or nothing else for me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Ian Thomas logged a full practice. If my memory serves me correctly, I'm pretty sure today, just a few hours ago, I got news that he logged full practice. So he's a guy that I actually have like a decent amount in best ball. I think you were getting him so late that he has kind of a breakout profile. He's athletic. He was productive in some sense in college, and through 2 years, he did nothing but produce when given the chance behind Greg Olsen. So he's a guy that I like. On the Raiders side, I do think it's interesting. We saw I think it was the 2011 season was the lockout season. And we saw more offensive production in that season than any other season, I believe, since. Like, this was basically defenses play such a reactionary role in the modern game of football that offensive continuity is not as important as defensive continuity is. Basically, defensive continuity is if all of your links in your chain are strong, you don't end up breaking. The offseason that was non-existent in 2011 meant that there was always weak links. Offenses found ways to pick them apart so much. I could see Henry Ruggs sort of playing that role of he is the weak link finder. His 4.27 speed, we saw that at Alabama. He was both effective at going deep, but especially like this kind of goes underlooked on his profile. He was effective at getting the ball short and then breaking you with his speed after like getting just a screen pass. So I think he's an interesting tournament play. I haven't projected like sub 3% ownership right now. So for me, he could be like an interesting, if you wanted to roll with McCaffrey in tournaments, he's an interesting way to bring it back. And I'm sure he's a salary saver as well. So he could be sort of the defensive breaker, especially in a Carolina defense that was god awful last year. I know they invested, I think, all 7 rounds of draft capital into defense. I still think that keeps them at a bottom 5 defensive unit. So for me, he's a guy that I think could probably be one of the better ways to get a different Christian McCaffrey lineup. Let's move on to our next game. What do we have here? Oh, we have, okay, well, this is our other chalk running back. Washington, 5.5-point dogs to the Eagles, a 42.5-point total. This has got to be the biggest total movement. Drops 2 points from where it opened. So for me, Miles Sanders is, I believe, at 62 or 6,400. He's a guy that if I knew he was 100% healthy, I'd lock button Miles Sanders, especially knowing Christian McCaffrey was going to get at least pull away some of that chalk, and Antonio Gibson on the same matter would kind of pull away a bit of ownership, have a bit of gravity to their ownership. I would be all in on Miles Sanders. He's nicked up heading into week 1. Doug Peterson came out today and said that they would consider putting him on a bit of a, managing his workload. I think he said early in the season they were considering, or there was the possibility of managing his workload. That concerns me a little bit. I believe Boston Scott is an above average backup, and he takes away the one thing I love my running backs to have, is that receiving upside, because he's such a talented receiver in his own right. If Miles Sanders is chalk, this offensive line also really banged up heading into the season. Are there just enough ways for him to fail that it makes sense to fade him as just a pure tournament strategy play? Because I love Miles Sanders with all my heart. He's my RB1 going into the rookie RB1 going into his rookie season. I didn't move off that at all. I think he's one of the better dynasty picks right now. Week 1 seems so concerning for me. What do you do with a guy like Miles Sanders? And I guess also in the receiving room, Jalen Reagor. I swear, I'm pretty sure he logged a full practice day. At least the reports were that he went through all of the drills. I don't know if they could still list him as a limited participant, but in terms of what happened, he logged a de facto full practice. I still think we should be talking about this game as if Jalen Reagor isn't going to play. But I would say that, caveat, if he does play, things change, and I'm probably less interested in a guy like Deshaun Jackson or Dallas Goedert. Let's push that to the side. Assuming Jalen Reagor doesn't play and assuming Miles Sanders plays at less than 100%, how do you attack this Eagles offense?
It's tough because Sanders is going to most likely be one of the most owned running backs on the whole slate. I mean, for a good reason too. I'm high on Sanders myself, but you're right. In tournaments, if you do want to get off that Sanders chalk, maybe he's not all that 100%. I don't know. I like him myself in cash, but I will get off in tournaments in some type of way. I mean, I do like the Eagles offense quite a bit against this Washington football team here. I know they improved their defense, over the offseason, but I still want to attack them. I like Wentz at quarterback, 6,300. And Jeffrey is another guy that's going to be very high owned. I mean, Jeffrey is 5,400, way too cheap for pretty much the only receiver on the Eagles, it seems like. I don't hate either tight end as well. This is just a game I really want to target, although it's probably going to be chalk. I'll tell you right now, I'm probably going to eat the chalk with Sanders and cash. I do think he has a nice floor there, nice touchdown upside in a total that's pretty high. As for the Washington side, if you do want to run up like a Wentz and Jeffrey stack back, you could go with McLaurin. I like McLaurin quite a bit at 5,600. I do think they're going to be coming from behind a lot of the game, and McLaurin is someone who gets a decent amount of targets, and I'm pretty high on the guy as well. I think he's a very good player. I know Haskins isn't the best quarterback in the world, but I think with the volume alone, he can definitely get stuff going. But other than that, of course, you got Gibson at 4,000. It's going to be chalky as well. I'm probably going to go there in cash. Tournaments is fine. I think there is some upside, but altogether, this is a game I'm going to have a ton of ownership on, which, kind of scares me, but, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, so let's move on to another game that, I don't know. There's actually, so for me, the Colts face Jacksonville, 7.5-point underdogs. 45 total. 45 is not uninteresting. It's not super high, but I do think a lot of times you see these low-owned plays. Basically, like you see a mediocre or a seemingly outwardly mediocre game stack go off because although Vegas is quite accurate, they're not perfect. And if they get a line like this wrong, I think of a perfect example was last year, one of like the my favorite DFS slates, because probably just because I got it right, that's and ends up being all I care about apparently, was the Miami versus the Cincinnati game. A back and forth, just fun, scrappy, bad team shootout. I think this could end up being one of those games, especially with Jacksonville. I don't think having no upside on offense. I talk about the Jets. I don't think they have any upside on offense. Gardner Minshew was not a bad quarterback in his first year. He threw very few interceptions to throwing a bunch of touchdowns. Now they lose Leonard Fournette. You can see them just throwing with reckless abandon. I think his weapons are sneaky good in DJ Chark, in Laviska Shenault, one of my favorite rookie receivers. And now they're completely without running back. Maybe this is where we'll start. I want to know if you want to game stack this, but I also want to know how you approach this backfield. Divine Ozigbo, I don't actually even know what's wrong with Divine Ozigbo. I just know he didn't practice today, and then they immediately went out and signed Dare Ogunbowale, who was waived by Tampa Bay. Neither Dare nor Chris Thompson really appear to be guys who would threaten James Robinson between the tackles. And Robinson, despite he played at an FCS school. It's not, he wasn't doing this at Alabama. I believe he went for 364 carries and over 1,900 yards at Illinois State. I know it's FCS, but when you kill your competition that badly at such a low level, it leads me to believe that you can do a lot of damage, not 100% of that damage, but still do a lot of damage at levels above that. Maybe the NFL is that, maybe it isn't. Are you any interest in a guy like James Robinson now that it seems like he has the between the tackles work entirely to himself? Assuming Divine Ozigbo does end up being out, their actions of signing Dare makes me believe that is the case. Obviously, Ryquell Armstead's still on the COVID-19 reserve list, and more obviously, I guess, Leonard Fournette released by the team. So for me, any interest in James Robinson, and what are you doing with Indy? I know T.Y. Hilton projects to be chalk. I just can't. I'm struggling to get on board with dusty old Phillip Rivers, who completely lost his deep ball last year, having a good connection with T.Y. Hilton. So how do you attack the Jags backfield any way you're running it back with Colts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, all that interested in trying to, figure out what's going to what's going to happen in this Jags backfield. Not overly interested in this game as a whole. I do think, Indianapolis could get out to a decent lead, and that would make sense to maybe doing a sneaky Minshew Chark stack or something like that. But altogether, I'm not interested in this game all that much. I mean, Marlon Mack is someone I do want to talk about, 5,300. I think there is rushing yard upside, and I do believe that they said they're going to try to get him involved in the passing game. And we know what Phillip Rivers likes to do, and he likes to check down to those running backs. So I think Marlon Mack definitely has maybe some touchdown upside against this Jags running defense. That's pretty bad there. But pretty much Mack for me. Other than that, I mean, it's really tough to find a good spot in this game.
Yeah, for me, I would agree. I'm a Jonathan Taylor guy, but I think regardless of who you choose, I kind of think Indy I want to attack as the running backs, mostly because although Phillip Rivers undoubtedly an upgrade on Jacoby Brissett basically a guy that they played slow and they ran the ball in an effort to entirely hide Jacoby Brissett as a quarterback. I still think Phillip Rivers is an upgrade, but I think he's an upgrade, especially for a guy, like Nyheim Hines, a guy like Jack Doyle, two positions he's targeted frequently. And last year, he was like 33rd on passer rating on attempts of over 20 yards. He not only was he bad, he was among the league's worst in deep ball. And that's kind of T.Y. Hilton's signature. So for me, if Hilton is going to be chalk and he has potentially one of the worst quarterbacks throwing to him for his specific skill set, that's like such an awesome out to fading T.Y. Hilton. And maybe the pivot there ends up being, if you like Marlon Mack. Let's move on to a game. I would say this game has better teams, and I'm almost just as meh on it. This is Minnesota versus Green Bay. Minnesota, 2.5-point favorites. A 45-point total has come down by 1.5 since opening. I just struggle to care at all about anything other than the RB1 and the wide receiver 1 on both these teams. Both of these teams have such concentrated offenses going to their lead back and to their number one receiver. I think Devontae Adams I believe he's 1,700. I believe he's 7,300. Not 1,700 less than Michael Thomas. He's just discount Michael Thomas. When you look at his target share, it should be identical, if not better, when you compare him to the next second and third and fourth receiver. Emmanuel Sanders is better than the combined talent of Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Allen Lazard, even at his older age. I'm still absolutely confident that he is better. The same with Jared Cook is going to be better than anyone they try to tight end. So for me, Davante Adams is just the cheaper way to buy Michael Thomas. Adam Thielen kind of get those same vibes from. Outside of that, both running backs are in play, but I can't find myself stacking this game. Is there any way you can convince me to get on an Allen Lazard or maybe on the other side, a BC Johnson?
No, not really. Really, in this game, I mean, you can always, Dalvin Cook's always in play. Aaron Jones is always in play. I'm not personally going there. What I do like a lot is Devontae Adams because you are getting that kind of discount on Michael Thomas, 7,300, like you mentioned. And it really doesn't matter who he plays. He's going to get a ton of targets. He's going to have that touchdown upside. He can go off and win a tournament pretty much any week. So I do like Adams quite a bit. He's probably one of my more favorite tournament plays on the slate. And Adam Thielen, I like a lot. No digs, so I think he's going to have a decent amount of targets this year. And I don't know, 6,700 is a pretty decent price. I think he's going to get a lot of volume, maybe fall into the end zone as well. I think Thielen and Adams are probably my go-tos in this game. I mean, Jones, like I said, just there's other spots I want to go to in running back. So pretty much Thielen and Adams.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Jones isn't bad. I just I don't feel the need to pay for him when I like solid leverage plays like Chris Carson, and in cash I like guys like Antonio Gibson, like McCaffrey, and as much as the injury scares me, still Miles Sanders. I just don't feel on an entire slate that I have to go to him. Let's move on to a game that someone in the chat, Jen Ryan, friend of mine, was probably on the first show I ever podcasted my voice on over at RotoViz, and I hate to say I am very proud to say has really helped me throughout my career. Asked, hey fellas, is Tyrod Taylor, Keenan, and Eckler too risky or what? I mean, sure, I'll call it too risky in cash, but in tournaments, I actually think this game has so much sneaky upside. I think this is a game that right now I'm not confident in. There are games that I like to stack better. We'll talk about one or two later, but we could look back and be like, yeah, why weren't we on Tyrod Taylor playing with the best weapons of his career against a terrible Cincinnati defense, against an awesome Cincinnati offense when you look at the weapons they have at receiver? Joe Mixon, I believe, can be one of the better receiving backs. A.J. Green in his prime is a top 5 receiver. I believe Tyler Boyd is one of the better slot receivers. And then John Ross at his peak is literally the fastest player in the history of the NFL based on his 40 time alone, and strung together like 200+ yard games at the start of last season. So much explosive playmaking ability, even looking deeper at T. Higgins, Auden Tate. Both of these offenses have quarterbacks that have potential upside. Tyrod Taylor, even though, yeah, he's going to convert a lot of dropbacks into rushes. We saw in his one Pro Bowl season in Buffalo, he gets this moniker as a check down game manager. He was a well above average passer on deep balls. He's a guy who I don't think he is necessarily going to chuck it deep every play, but when he does, he's efficient at it. Joe Burrow, obviously maybe the best single season of college football in the history of the sport at LSU. There's so much upside here, but we only see a 43 total. Both teams have, outs to being not that good as well. Joe Burrow, a rookie in a terrible offseason to be a rookie, and Tyrod Taylor, a guy who, has a moniker as a game manager for a reason, although I do think he's an efficient game manager, and he could just soak up all of the, quote, pass attempts by rushing those pass attempts away. So is this a game that you're going to be mad that you didn't stack looking back on when both teams go off crazy?
You make a really good point there. I mean, this is not a game I'm looking at, but Tyrod Taylor at 5,600 is really intriguing, especially with the stack with Keenan Allen at 6,400, someone who's going to get a bunch of targets, a bunch of receptions. I'm really, really high on Keenan Allen. So this could be one of those sneaky stacks where you go with Taylor and an Allen stack. You get Eckler in there. Against a Bengals defense who it just isn't very good. So yeah, this could be one of those really sneaky low-owned games that could, pop off. So yeah, you're right. As for, the other side of the ball, like Joe Mixon from the Bengals, he's going to have a ton of touches. I don't hate that whatsoever at 6,700. I'm not too sure about Joe Burrow yet. I want to see, kind of how he plays, but I think he's a decent sneaky option. But really for me, I mean, yeah, I don't hate that Taylor and Keenan Allen stack.
Yeah, another thing to note about this game is there's been, mixed reports throughout the offseason on what the status of Mike Williams is going to be. I would say at the best case, comes into the week very hampered, although I don't think he's going to play. I know I believe it's Daniel Popper from The Athletic said that, despite the general outward optimism, the team was basically preparing for him not to be ready throughout most of September. That was a possibility on their radar. That's why we see like a guy like Joe Reed getting some camp buzz. he's a guy who interesting, but I don't think, I think Jen has it right. I'm looking at Tyrod, Keenan, and Eckler. I think you could throw Hunter Henry into that mix, but I actually feel much more confident in like one. Keenan Allen gets the bag. Congratulations on the offseason, Keenan, with that massive extension. He's a guy who is going to just completely soak up targets across the middle of the field. And if you believe Tyrod Taylor deserves, I think he deserves some of the credit he gets as a sort of, check down game managing type of quarterback, that is Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler to a T. So for me, I think Jen both has it right in who she wants to stack on this team specifically, and the fact that this game, I would not be surprised. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a ton of exposure to it or not, but it's not like Jets Bills. If Jets Bills smashes the over and wins someone a milli, I will come into this next show absolutely floored, and I'll be like, football's random. It's just randomness. It doesn't even matter. Forget about week one. If this game goes off crazy, I'll be like, yeah, I think that actually is a pretty reasonable outcome, given how much I think potential upside it holds. Moving on to, I'm going to call it my favorite game to stack of the slate, given what I think I can get in terms of low ownership. We have San Francisco hosting the Cardinals. San Francisco 7-point favorites, a 47.5-point total. One of the, I think it's about fourth or fifth, depending on your book, highest total on the main slate. I just don't see how Kyler Murray is on DraftKings priced as the number 7 quarterback. We saw last year he posted, I believe it was 5 top 10 fantasy performances on the entire week, not just like on the main slate. And he did 2 of those against San Francisco. Kyler Murray, with his legs, gives defenses with good pass rushes fits. Like, that is something, he takes a lot of sacks, but he also avoids a lot of sacks, and he puts up a lot of yardage on the ground. I think in those combined games, he averaged 50 yards on the ground. This was a team that he at least kept his team, the Cardinals, in until the last drive. I think one game ended as like a one-possession game. The other one, Larry Fitzgerald fumbled and someone took it to the house. Otherwise, these were 2 games that they took Super Bowl runner-up San Francisco down to the wire. They get an improved offensive line. They get a second year in a Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray system. And obviously, the big news, DeAndre Hopkins, with that extension under his belt now, maybe the best receiver, I think at least a solid argument to be the best receiver in the NFL right now, paired with one of these young ascending quarterbacks who has so much rushing upside. I think on a given slate, he probably has the number 2 chance of, and probably the only realistic chance outside of Lamar Jackson, of a 300-100 game. And San Francisco has the best tight end in the league, or the second best if you want to call Travis Kelce better. Who cares? Second best, whatever. One of the best tight ends in the league facing the GOAT, the greatest tight end matchup ever. I know there are people who say, and I am a bit of a proponent of this, at least in the middle, that matchups don't really matter. And I think, obviously, like, Kyler Murray going as a top 10 fantasy QB against San Francisco twice is a bit of a testament to that. I think on the other end, there are outlier scenarios where defenses can either be so oppressively good, like we saw with New England, or so incredibly bad, like we saw with Arizona last year, that they can get mauled by a tight end. And obviously, if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be George Kittle, especially at best case, they get a banged up Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. At worst case, they lose, probably more likely to be Deebo Samuel. For me, such an easy run back. And I'm seeing really low ownership projections for a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. He's also under 7K as maybe the best receiver in the league. So am I crazy for just like wanting to go all in on this game?
No, not really. I mean, you made some great points. Like Hopkins, one of the best receivers, 6,800. I actually like that quite a bit, and you can even stack that with a guy like Murray, 6,400. But for me, what I kind of like, and I think this will be pretty sneaky, is Jimmy Garoppolo, Kittle stack. I think not many people are going to play Garoppolo, and against this Arizona defense, who is very, very, very bad against the pass, I can see Garoppolo getting into the end zone a couple times. So Kittle, I do think he's going to be pretty chalky. Honestly, it's going to be kind of hard to get a guy like McCaffrey and Kittle in the same lineup, but in tournaments, I'm definitely looking at a guy like Kittle. And then same thing for Hopkins. Due to that low ownership, it seems like not many people are talking about him. So 6,800 for DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, sign me up.
Yeah, I mean, you can't talk me off the ledge. I can't talk you for stepping off of it with me. And I don't mind the San Francisco side of it either. Jimmy Garoppolo was a guy who we saw when they didn't need to use him. Yeah, he didn't get used, but then you see him go into these shootout style games. I'm thinking of the New Orleans game, one of the best single games, not only of DFS, but just in terms of watching it. They go into New Orleans and just play an awesome game. For me, he has that upside. Of course, if they end up, beating the brakes off of a lesser Arizona team, you're not getting much out of Jimmy Garoppolo, but you're playing for that 80th, that 90th percentile outcome. And we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo's 90th percentile outcome is quite good, among the best in the league as, a tier 2, tier 3 passer, and you have to pay that price at most for him, and you're definitely getting less than you're getting essentially no ownership on a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. Moving on, last game of the slate, and in contention with Seattle, with the Seattle-Atlanta game for the chalkiest game of the slate. The Saints face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Saints are 3.5-point favorites, a 49-point total, one of the highest totals on the slate. Alvin Kamara projected to be one of the highest owned running backs on the slate. The same thing for Michael Thomas. Now, this is probably the biggest development to happen on the main slate, in my opinion. Mike Evans misses practice with, Arians called it a soft tissue injury. It seems like it would be like a hammy or a quad or like a calf or something. I'm not entirely sure. They didn't have to say. Maybe they've updated it since. But anyway, Arians calls him day-to-day. At best, it seems like he comes in a little nicked up. At worst, he doesn't play, and Chris Godwin becomes the chalkiest of chalky receivers of all time. I guess I'll probably talk about it as if Evans is playing now. For me, this is a game that I'm not entirely sure what to do. I think it's going to be the most popular game, and that's typically a spot you want to pivot off of, because when people are so overconfident in their ability to project such a random, essentially, game that is football, I just want to leverage that into profit. And for me, that's why I go to Arizona. I think maybe one of the ways you do that is just trying to capture like touchdown equity in this game with a guy like Alvin Kamara. That gets you one chalky player, but it also probably gets you off of Michael Thomas, and maybe it gets you off. You could go Alvin Kamara, Saints defense. I'm just not really sure what to do with this game when I know everyone's going to want to be in on it. How do you approach not only this game, but just overall when consensus, it makes sense. I think this has the best chance of being the highest scoring game, maybe outside of Seattle-Atlanta. But I'm not that confident that I can predict that, whereas I can make money by that not happening. So how do you approach a situation like this?
No, you're right. This is going to be the chalkiest game on the slate, and for a good reason. 49-point total. I do think it will possibly shoot out. This is tough. There's so many good options here. I mean, Michael Thomas, we got to mention him at 9,000 against an awful pass defense in the Buccaneers. But for me, my favorite play on this game here is Alvin Kamara. I think there's a lot of reception upside. The Buccaneers have an extremely good run defense. I think they were first in run defense last year, and I think he's going to get a lot of targets. And with a game total being so high, I can see Kamara finding the end zone a couple times. So I think it's a nice pivot if you do want to pivot off of McCaffrey. You're getting that savings with Kamara there, so that's probably where I'm going to go to in a lot of tournaments there. Tom Brady is obviously very interesting. I think since it's going to be a high-scoring game, you can definitely stack him with guys like Godwin, Evans if he plays, Rob Gronkowski. But if Mike Evans doesn't play, man, I'm probably going to put the lock button on Chris Godwin. I mean, he's already a fantastic play, and if you're taking out Evans, all those targets are going to go to Chris Godwin. So that's something we're going to have to look at, as the week goes on. But for me, it's a lot of Alvin Kamara. It's a lot of maybe some Michael Thomas. I know I'm probably going to pay down at wide receiver because there is so much value. So I don't know if I'm going to have that much Michael Thomas. So I'm going to hope he doesn't do all that great. I know it's a fantastic matchup, 9,000, but I do want to pay up at running back with Kamara, with McCaffrey, all that. But this is going to be a very fun game. If you do want to get off of the chalk, I think you can, but it's kind of hard to.
Yeah, it just seems like it makes so much sense that I'm not catch me dead before I'm playing any Bucks running backs. Like, I think this is going to be like the choppiest three-way committee. I mean, maybe, I don't know, Bruce Arians has said that Ronald Jones is still the guy, that Leonard Fournette changes nothing, and in an offseason where Leonard Fournette doesn't get any camp, doesn't really get probably 3 or 4 practices with the team, it would make sense that he doesn't get the ball early in the season. So maybe for week 1, this looks exactly like we thought it was going to before Leonard Fournette signed. So maybe Ronald Jones is your guy, but I just can't I can't invest in a running back that his team seems to have told us every single chance they get, they don't want him to get the ball. They sign LaShawn McCoy. They draft Keyshawn Vaughn. They get Leonard Fournette. As much as Bruce Arians says he wants to get him the ball, the team's actions say that is just not the case. So I have no interest in the running game. I think the only thing that would make me get in on the passing game is I think if we get some late week news on Mike Evans that he's not going to play, he's going to be on a snap count, I would think that you can probably eat some Saints chalk and then run it back with a guy like Scotty Miller, who has great speed. He's a guy who is a dominant and productive at a young age college player. I think he is the guy. I mean, he seems to be set to be the number 3 receiver and step up as the number 2. Justin Watson actually shares, he's just like tall Scotty Miller. He's basically another young, productive, and college dominant player. So for me, Scotty Miller seems to be the number 2, and he's who I would roll with. I think he would probably go under owned if the Mike Evans news came in late, like if we got, Friday news on Mike Evans or whatever. He's a guy who I think would not get the ownership he deserves as like a pseudo handcuff wide receiver. And that probably opens me up to running it back with a little like Alvin Kamara chalk or maybe Michael Thomas. Because actually, I think that's kind of the point I want to end on, is that you and I agree that there are so many good options at receiver. For me, it's that game we talked about. It's Devontae Adams dueling Adam Thielen. Both like could put up the exact same target share numbers as Michael Thomas, and you're getting like multi-$1,000 discounts on DraftKings for them. So that is going to do it, everyone. I think we can throw it around to some questions. If anyone on the YouTube channel has questions, throw them out in the chat and we'll get to them. Emil, if you're watching Periscope or whatever, you can feel free to jump in and give us some questions. And while we wait for those, go ahead and throw me your final thoughts for this game, Brady, or this, I guess, the entire slate. What is your thesis to this slate?
I mean, this slate's going to be fun. There's just so much value that you really don't honestly have to go up and get McCaffrey. You don't have to go up and get Thomas. There's lots of value plays as well. For cash, like always, I'm going to start with McCaffrey, but you can honestly, there's so many good plays on the slate. I'm really looking forward to see how it all plays out. There's still some news that might break by Sunday, so make sure you guys are keeping track and looking at the news and stuff. But it's going to be a fun slate. I'm really looking forward to this upcoming football season. I'm looking forward to this slate a lot, and I'm ready to win some money this year.
All right, I think that's going to do it. I haven't heard news of any questions other than the awesome Jen Ryan's question, making me reconsider what I'm doing, not getting more exposure to those charges. So I guess for myself, for Brady, you can find us on Twitter at DFS_numbers and at Kyle Tweets here. And we'll catch you next Wednesday and break down that next slate. And of course, be on the lookout. I have like cash and GPP breakdowns on Football Diehards. We will be getting ownership data on Football Diehards. Big news there. So excited to have that on a site that I use frequently. Everyone, I guess we'll catch you next week. Beam us up, Emil. Shoot us out of here. Now we just get like behind the scenes little post show credits.